You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hey y'all, spooky season is here. And if you're looking for a show to whet your appetite for a little haunted history, then I'd like to invite you to check out Southern Gothic, a chart-topping history podcast that explores some of the most infamous legends, folklore, ghost stories, and hauntings of the American South. We've covered all sorts of stuff from the Bell Witch of Tennessee to the disappearance of the Confederate submarine, the H.L. Hunley, not to mention our deep dives into the local lore of some of America's oldest and most haunted cities, like New Orleans, Charleston, and St. Augustine. So, if you're ready for a little good old-fashioned Halloween storytelling with a commitment to quality historical research, then be sure to check out Southern Gothic today. It's available now on all your favorite podcast apps.
If you enjoy bizarre true stories, then the Useless Information Podcast is the podcast for you. For example, did you know that author Robert Louis Stevenson gave his birthday away? Or that there was a football team that played for 6 years before someone realized that the school never ever existed? Or that a dog in upstate New York was once placed on trial for murder? Well, to hear these and hundreds of additional fascinating true stories from the Flipside history, be sure to check out the Useless Information Podcast. That's the Useless Information Podcast, podcasting worldwide since 2008 and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. Be sure to check it out.
Hello, delicious friends, and welcome to Who Did What Now, the history podcast that's not your history class, with me, your host, Katie Charlwood, history harlot and reader of books, who, at this moment in time, is clearly one sandwich short of a picnic. Oh, friends, you'll never guess what I did. I just recorded 40 minutes. 40 full minutes. With the microphone on the laptop and not my Yeti microphone, because I was like, why is this sounding distorted? Because I was just starting to, edit a little bit. And yeah, I realised that I had been recording with the wrong microphone for the whole bloody time. So I'm not doing the best right now. Oh my goodness. That being said, if you want to cheer me up, you could vote for me in the British Podcast Awards. That was a smooth segue, don't you think? So it turns out I'm eligible for it, so I thought, why not? It would be so funny, because I'm up against, these massive, huge podcasters, right? With, full equipped studios and teams and researchers. And then you've got me, who's recording in a kitchen with a broken window in a field in Ireland. How funny would it be if I got to the top 5 even? We have the opportunity to do something fucking hilarious. Also, to warn people who think that I'm really unprofessional because I called a fuckwit. Because here's the thing, anybody who assaults and abuses a vulnerable family member after she suffers a miscarriage, I'm sorry, I get to call you whatever I like. I don't care. Yes, this is in reference to the Mary Toft episode. Anywho, vote for me in the British Podcast Awards. Yes, I'll be saying the same thing when the Irish Podcast Awards come out. And yeah, you don't have to be British, you don't have to be Irish, you don't have to be any of these things to vote. You just got to validate your email address. All of your old MSN accounts that you had, that you're gathering dust. Just saying you could vote from any of them as long as you prove that you're not, fake voting, then you're good, I guess. Anyhow, and what is probably the shortest ever intro I've ever done, I'm going to quit my jibber jabber and fact you. Yes, fact you I will, but first we have got to get our source on. So our main source is actually a book that I was sent, and I wouldn't have known this story otherwise. It just hadn't come up, which is weird because it's so in my wheelhouse that I'm genuinely surprised I didn't see it like beforehand. And it's Beverly Hills Spy by Ronald Drabkin. So now, of course, this is not going to be my only source because you know me, I can't help myself. I gotta go digging. So we have information from the Imperial War Museum. We've got articles from the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, the London Gazette. We've got Rutland of Jutland by Desmond Young. Reassessing pre-war Japanese espionage, the Rutland Naval Spy Case and the Japanese Intelligence Threat Before Pearl Harbor by Max Everest Phillips. Frederick Rutland, Tinker, Sailor, Aviator, Spy by Thomas Bradbeer. British Flying Ace was Spy for Japan by Richard Norton Taylor. And of course we have one of our favourites, History.com. You think I wouldn't look at History.com? Of course I did. But remember, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then let's begin. Let's do this. Again! Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Frederick Joseph Rutland was born on the 21st of October, 1886, in Weymouth, England. For historical timeline context, we are still in the Victorian era. That's right, Queen Vic, still alive. So Frederick Joseph Rutland, he is one of many children born to a day labourer from Dorset. And being the family of a day labourer, which is not consistent work, they're not exactly flush. Like, they probably got like a wee bit of rudimentary schooling, just so they knew how to add things and whatnot. But they're not sustaining well, and he's expected to go work with his uncle up in like a mill and stuff, or follow his dad into day labouring. So effectively, the family's living hand to mouth. But Weymouth, as it happens, is fairly close to where the Navy are training. And so Rutland just nopes out of that existence and enlists in the Navy at the age of 14. Like he's like on the cusp of 15 and he enlists as a boy seaman. Yes, that is a thing. So he's 15-ish, he's not quite. He is undernourished, which is the gentle term. Basically, he's short for his age, he's scrawny. Like, we are very lucky he does not have rickets. Like, no rickets, no scurvy. Like, those are marks we are not expecting to hit, and yet, good. So yeah, he's poor, he's short, and they're like, yeah, seems legit, and they take him on. So he's doing well for himself, like he thrives in the Navy, and he is working his way up, and he becomes a diver for the British Royal Navy. And he is doing well for a man of his station. He gets married to Dorothy, who's a little bit older than him actually. She's older than him when they marry, and she's a school teacher. And they end up having 2 kids together, Freddie and Barbara. So basically, Frederick Jr. and Barbara. So one day he's doing his diving exercises and he sees a plane fly overhead. And he decides, that's it. That's what I want to do. Like, he is just struck by it. And he has this desire to fly a plane. Like the man, I mean, impulsive is one word, but he's bloody determined, right? So in order to qualify as a pilot, he has to sit this pretty stringent exam. And remember, he's not so great with the reading and writing. Like, he's not illiterate, right? But he's not like writing any novels anytime soon. So his wife, the school teacher, Dorothy, she helps him. Like, she helps him study. I'm assuming she helps with his penmanship. Like, she is just getting him ready. Like, she is supporting him 100%. So in 1914, when World War II breaks out, he's a flight sub-lieutenant in the RNAS, which is the Royal Naval Air Service. Now, it does change names a bit throughout this, and I'm going to call it a few things. it's all airplanes for British military, right? There you go. So he gets his aviator certificate in 1915, and then 1916, he's promoted to lieutenant. So that's in January of that year. And by May, he is serving in the Great War. He is a pilot on a seaplane tender, the HMS Engadine, and it's only, 5 years old at this point, because it was, I think, commissioned in 1911. So he's a pilot on it, and on this seaplane tender, you've got 2 short Type 184s and 2 Sopwith baby float planes. So these planes, how do I put this? They're not the most structurally sound aviation machines. They were made of wood and canvas and held together with string. Now, I think technically rope. That being said, on occasion, it was string, because these planes, they are notorious for breaking down, which is unsurprising, because they're made of lollipop sticks and napkins. But yeah, he flies them, which honestly you have to be either brave or crazy to do so. It is a fine line, and he crosses both of them consistently. So these planes, they had to be like winched or hoisted down, like into the water in order to fly, because you couldn't just like fly off the deck. Like that wasn't something you could do. Like they hadn't figured that out yet. Because remember, aviation at this point, still fairly new. Still a fairly new concept. And yeah, Rutland, he's lucky because he is like technologically minded. And he had found ways to like update like stuff on the planes, like the radio, for example. Because he noticed his radio was a bit dodgy. So he updated his. And then he updated someone else's. And then he went to like his higher ups. And they ended up updating the radios for like all of the fleet. And remember as well, the radio is what, like 30, 40 years old at this point? Like it's not like an old technology. Like this guy has such a fantastic brain and he is hungry for this, you know? So 30th of May, 1916, the Battle of Jutland. This is like the most important mission for the Royal Navy Flying Corps, like to date. You've got 150 British ships on one side and 99 German ships on the other. So you've got 51 more ships. You should be winning this. Like that's how they see it. And his mission in this is to fly about and gather intel. So he's supposed to fly about and follow the German ships through the fog, because it's foggy as fuck. And he's supposed to radio back their positions to the fleet. Now, surprise, surprise, his plane breaks down. Not because it's shot down, but because, you know, it has the structural integrity of a Blue Peter project. So yeah, it breaks down. Like, they try and shoot him. The German Navy try to shoot him down, and they fail because he really is just that good. And also, they hadn't really designed their guns to aim up at that point. Like, they were expecting to aim out, you know? So it gets to the point where he has to, like, fix his plane, like, climb outside of his plane, fix it to get back up in the air. So during this battle, one of the British ships takes, like, heavy damage, like, massive damage, and it has to be tugged back. And it is brought back on the HMS Engadine. Now, at this point, when this is happening, he's frustrated because he was hoping to go out and do, like, more missions, but he's basically relegated to being on the ship at this point, and he's like, because it's later that day, he's getting kind of antsy. So he's there helping out, and they're passing bodies of injured men, of injured sailors, like, they're passing them from ship to ship. So the ship that is damaged, they're passing them on to, you know, the good ship. So sometimes they're on, like, stretchers, sometimes they're just trying to, like, lug them over. And one man, like, he tumbles over the edge and into the water. Now, you've got some people who are just continuing to do their job, they're continuing to pass people over, and others are kind of like frozen. Apart from Rutland, who, like quick as a flash, ties a rope around his waist and dives into the water. Like, no one else considers this. Like, this is, like, wild to them. But for him, this just seemed like an automatic thing to do because he was a diver in the Navy. He was a strong swimmer and he knew he could do it. So he leaps off of a ship that is tugging another ship away from the German Navy, I might add. And so he just like dives into the water, swims towards the unconscious man, gets a grip on him, and like tells them to tug them up, like hoist them back up the ship. And so at one point they're just like hanging like halfway up like the side of the ship. And because of the way like the other ship is being tugged, it gets very, very close to crushing them. Now, luckily, they both get up and everyone's just like astounded. They're like, he's a hero. And when news of this gets back home, like the Rutland of Jutland, like perfect, you know, rhyming, newspapers, the press, they love it. Because of course they do. It's a war hero situation. It's the stuff you read in adventure magazines, you know. Like this is, you know, the heroic war stories. That's the things you want to hear that build up morale. Not all quiet on the Western Front, which is, you know, horror. I mean, that's the thing about true horror. Like, it's from real life, you know? So, yeah, he is so, like, popular. Like, his, like, I say crew, like, the people that are on, like, the same ranking as him, they aren't too keen on him. They think that he's controlling, that he likes to micromanage. They didn't know the term micromanage, but that's what it is. He's very opinionated. He's also very charming and he loves attention. So when reporters are coming on, like he doesn't let anybody talk to them but him. Like he makes a big deal about himself, which fair enough. You know, you did dive into water during a battle or just after a battle and save an unconscious man. You saved, you know, a fellow soldier or naval man, whatever. Like you saved your comrade, you know? And so he's kind of a big deal. And so for everything he did that day, from like the reconnaissance to, you know, saving that dude's life, he earns the Distinguished Service Cross and the Gold Albert Medal first class. So the Gold Albert Medal is given for extreme heroic daring in saving the lives of others. Now, he does let this go to his head a wee bit because, as you would, you know, I'm kind of a big deal. So yeah, he is continuing to work with the Navy and he's working on planes because he's like, there has to be a way for us to fly a plane like from a ship. Because he's like, this is not working for us. Like, even from a time management perspective, like, he's trying to work out the kinks. He's like, the time that's wasted lowering it into the water is just too much. And so he ends up flying from I'm going to call it a platform, but that is me being very generous. It is more than a plank. But I think less than a board. It's effectively, there's two long guns on the ship. And they put this, like, piece of wood, like, in that gap between them. And he basically flies a plane off of it. And that's, like, in 1917. And, like, again, brave or crazy. Like, no one else could really do it. Like, people had really hurt themselves trying to. But he ends up just, like, going for it. So the admirals absolutely adore him. They think he is the bee's knees, like he's really good for publicity. And again, his fellow officers and whatnot, they're just not into it. And it's not just because he's a bit of a dick. It's also because, as far as they're concerned, he's common as muck. Because remember, he's probably got a regional accent. He's from Dorset. It's probably a really bad Dorset impression. Anyone from like Weymouth, I'm so sorry. But yeah, they don't like him because they're hardy-doity. You know, they're from Cambridge and Oxford and these high education places. You know, they went to a higher education, but they're also like really young. They're just fresh out of like uni college, and he is, you know, he's 30 at this point, 31 I think at this point. And so they think he's old and he's common and we are better than him. So most of the men in the RNAF, like they see themselves as above him, right? They're just posh, really. So, but he's continuing to work. He's doing a lot of technical stuff. He's improving seaplanes and aircraft carriers and the like. And then sort of the RNAF, it becomes the new Royal Air Force. And they tell him effectively that he's gone as far as he's going to go. Like, he's not going to advance anymore. He's not going to go any higher. And they don't specifically say that it's a class thing, but it's totally a class thing. And what they say things is like, well, how many German planes did you shoot down? Oh, and he's like, none, because I was flying a paper bag. Like, what? You know, it's one of those things like, how long is a piece of string? Like, it's a nonsense question. And it's just another way to put a barrier and sort of, because they don't like social mobility, first of all. It's just bigotry in one form, innit? Now, it doesn't help, I might add, that he violates a social norm. You know, he does something that's a bit taboo, which is wife swaps with another officer. And I don't mean like put their car keys in a bowl, grabbing a pineapple. No. No. They literally swap wives. His Dorothy moves out, and the other Dorothy moves in. Yes, they are both called Dorothy. It was a popular name back then, clearly. Now this, again, super taboo. You don't do that. He has broken one of the unwritten rules, although I'm pretty sure it is written down somewhere. So he is, at this point, mad. Like, because he is really, really capable. He's really skilled. He's technologically minded. He's always thinking of ways to improve. And he was so ready to serve his country. And he wanted the recognition for that. The reward and recognition, which I get, absolutely. But he's been told that they're just not going to let him go up any further. That they are holding him back. Even though, you know, it's supposed to be a meritocracy, he's supposed to move up that ladder, but they're just knocking out the rungs on top of him. And so he is, at this point, incensed. He's been there for years. Like, it's 1922, and he is steaming out of his ears. And he just gets so frustrated, he's so angry, like it is bubbling up inside him, that he makes a choice. And that choice is to walk into the office of the Japanese Navy in Westminster and says to the man at the desk, "I'd like to talk to you." And that, delicious friends, I think is a really good time for a little commercial break. We'll be right back.
Hello, listeners. This is Anne Bogle, author, blogger, and creator of the podcast, What Should I Read Next? Since 2016, I've been helping readers bring more joy and delight into their reading lives. Every week, I talk all things books and reading with a guest and guide them in discovering their next read. They share 3 books they love, 1 book they don't, and what they've been reading lately. And I recommend 3 titles they may enjoy reading next. Guests have said our conversations are like therapy, troubleshooting issues that have plagued their reading lives for years, and possibly the rest of their lives as well. And of course, recommending books that meet the moment, whether they are looking for deep introspection to spur or encourage a life change, or a frothy page-turner to help them escape the stresses of work, school, everything. You'll learn something about yourself as a reader, and you'll definitely walk away confident to choose your next read with a whole list of new books and authors to try. So join us each Tuesday for What Should I Read Next? Subscribe now wherever you're listening to this podcast and visit our website, whatshouldireadnextpodcast.com, to find out more.
And we are back. So Frederick Joseph Rutland, he has sauntered into a Japanese Navy office in London because he wants to have a wee chat. And these two Japanese officers know exactly who Rutland is, and they are very, very excited to talk to him. And they straight up offer him a job as an advisor on their new parastrike force of the Japanese Navy. Like, the Japanese Naval Academy was based off of the British one. Like, they're this close, they're this tight. So I think for Rutland as well, it was easy to justify it because they're not enemies, they're allies. You know, he's not going against Britain by doing this. He's just going to someone who values him and will be happy to use his expertise and his skills and give him that, you know, praise and reward and recognition that he wants. Like, again, very easy to justify. So he ends up resigning from the RAF, and he gets a petition of divorce from original Dorothy, naming him as an adulterer. And he doesn't contest it. He's like, yeah, fair enough. So they get a divorce, and then he remarries, like, other Dorothy. So Dorothy 2.0. So they're married, and I think they're in France for like a little bit before they end up in Japan. Because the RAF, they are a wee bit sus. And they don't want to like release his passport just yet, so they hold off on it. But Japan decide to be a wee bit sneaky. So in order to get Rutland over to Japan, they say that he's working for Mitsubishi, like, I don't know, doing radios or like fixing machinery or whatever Mitsubishi was doing in Japan in the 1920s. So he is getting a job with them, which is a private company. So like all legal documents, if you looked at them, he would be being paid by Mitsubishi. I just mispronounced, I'm sure. So publicly, he is working for Mitsubishi, and privately, he is building the Japanese naval air arm. And like MI5, again, they're suspicious. They've held his passport for a while, but they cannot justify it because he's off to work with a Japanese company, a private company. They can't stop him. Now, MI5 does not find out what he's doing, and they don't find out, like, for decades. Like, they only find out, like, some of this stuff that he was doing when the Imperial War records are, like, unsealed. Like, I think some of it was in the 90s. Like, it was a long time. So he ends up moving to Japan, which is like a lot of British people moved to Japan. It was a very like normal thing. Loads of people moved there. And he was working on like landing gears for a plane, like through Mitsubishi. So it's like, how would I put this? It's like semi-legit. Like, he's not doing anything untoward at the minute. He's just, you know, finding a way to get there, really. And he is loving life. He's pals with all the top admirals. He is needed. You know, they need him and his expertise. And at this point, he is just improving their navy. And so he's teaching pilots how to land on aircraft carriers. Like, he's working on hydraulic shots, weight distribution, how to land, where to fly from, all of it. And the thing about Japan, again, lots of British people visiting, especially British naval officers. And it's not gone unnoticed that in Japan, Rutland was like rubbing shoulders with like high-ranking Japanese admirals, and that he's like basically getting VIP treatment wherever they see him. And so, like, the rumours swirl. And remember as well, he's like being officially paid by Mitsubishi, but he's also being like brown envelope, like under the table by the Japanese Navy. And he is making bank. Now, eventually, he's like done. He's improved it to a point. And by 1928, he moves back to the UK and ends up working in his brother-in-law's truck manufacturing business. And he is bored as fuck. Like, he feels like he is watching paint dry. Like, he's also a wee bit of an adrenaline junkie. Like, he likes the excitement of it. Like, it's the concept of it being a bit naughty. Like, ooh, giggle, giggle. Like, as opposed to it being anything sort of sinister. So he's not happy. I mean, it's fine. He's fine. I mean, he's not exactly the best salesman, interestingly, even though he does have the gift of the gab, but he's just so him, But then an interesting offer comes his way. Basically, the Japanese Navy show up in 1931 and they want him to move to LA and work as an emissary for them. See, here's the thing. Many of the militaries of this era, they are aware at this point that fighter planes are the next step in warfare. And the relationship between Japan and the US had not been going well. So in the 20s, the US had banned Japanese immigration, and all this legislation is happening through Hawaii and the West Coast with hundreds of Japanese Americans being placed under surveillance for being Japanese Americans. But here's the thing, right? A lot of these Japanese Americans, because they lived in America, they wouldn't have been so trusted by traditional Japanese, especially second and third generation. They're just no, thank you. There wouldn't have been that bond or that trust, because a lot of Japanese Americans would see themselves first and foremost as Americans, so that it's just a weird thing to do. Anywho, because of all of this, Japanese intelligence officers were very determined to invest in a heavily decorated white man and charming war hero for the Allies. Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious. Because who is going to suspect British war hero as being a Japanese spy? It's weird. You probably read British war hero, Japanese spy, and you're and he's not Japanese? No. He has no connection to Japan? No. He just kind of joined? Yep. Okay. Weird, right? It's not something that you just automatically join the dots of, especially in the 1930s. You're seems off, So Rutland, he heads over to Los Angeles in 1933. But he takes a pit stop in Japan, obviously, to discuss his mission with Japanese officials. So he's supposed to go and set up and build sources and networks in the USA while reporting back to Tokyo about the United States war preparations. And from the get-go, he was to collect pictures and technical information of the Navy ships and aircraft in LA, in Long Beach. You've got the warplane factories, Lockheed and Douglas, they're in Santa Monica and Burbank, and of course Hawaii, which had the US Pacific Fleet. So he gets set up with this cover of a trading company. I say cover because they just give him so much money. So he's I'm in stocks and shares and bonds. I don't know why I've given him a transatlantic accent, because he's from I don't know what accent this is supposed to be, but this is offensive to everybody, I think. I think I've tried to make it Yorkshire. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? Oh God, what was that? Ain't that a scouse? That was bad. That's a bad accent. I'm not great at accents, lads. You should know it at this point. So out of everybody they could have picked, why Rutland? Well, one, like, they've known him for years. He helped build their navy. They know he can do a good job. And 2, he's pretty easy pickings. Like if you want to make someone join your side, it helps that they've been overlooked by their own country and have felt that they have been slighted by the very people they tried to serve, you know? Especially when he is clearly capable and skilled and intelligent, and they just kind of went, no, you're common, you can't. Like, what? So yeah, Japan scooped him up, and he gets paid like 10 times the amount like the top admirals would get paid. He earns £6,200 in his first year, which, like, if you want to convert into like modern money, like in today's money, it's like dollars. I think it's like $500,000, like a year. Oh, and I have a fun fact for you. The person who issued his checks was Izuki Ono, the parent of Yoko Ono. If you don't know who that is, Google the Beatles and the Yoko problem, because it's a whole thing, lads. So the director of the Japanese Naval Intelligence, Takasu, told Rutland that all communications were to occur out with the embassy in Washington to avoid suspicion. Which honestly, yeah, seems like a smart move. Takasu also decided that Rutland would meet with officials once a year at locations like across like America and Asia. Obviously, info needs to be passed like more than just like annually. Like once a year doesn't quite cut it when you're trying to, you know, steal state secrets. And so he would send handwritten letters to a dead drop in Japan, and he would receive stuff via a post office box. So the letters would always start with like, Dear Fred, which seems fair enough because his name's Frederick. So Dear Fred, and it's signed Augie, which I don't know what Augie is meant to be, but I'm sure they had a really fun reason for using it. So they had a contingency plan actually as well. If war broke out, and that was he was to get his spy on and deliver the info to the Japanese embassy in Ottawa, in Canada. Now, through all of this, of course he needs a code name, a Japanese spy name, of course he does, and it's Shinkawa, which means New River. And I would like to apologise to anybody who speaks Japanese, because I know it's tonal, and I have probably buggered it up. So, 1933, moves to LA, couple of months in, Dorothy 2.0 joins him, along with his kids from his previous marriage, Freddie and Barbara. Like, he was feeling a bit bad because he felt like he'd neglected them, which was also one of the reasons why he moved back to the UK, because he thought, family. But that didn't quite go as he planned. So yeah, Dorothy and Frederick, they have no kids in Japan. Don't know why. Could be many reasons. But when they get to LA, they end up having 2, David and Annabelle. Now, when you've got a family, you need a house. So in 1934, he buys a house in Warbler Place in the Hills, which is massive. It's got a pool, the whole lot. And he founded his company, Rutland, Edwards and Company, near the LA Stock Exchange. And his kids, they go to exclusive private schools, and he joins social clubs, including the Del Monte Club and the British United Services Club, whose patrons include the Stars of the Day, which honestly, a bit of it's like the He-Man Woman Haters Club, because like no women allowed, like, well, no wives or girlfriends allowed, like, you know, wink wink. So see, a lot of the silent film stars of the era are British. You've got Errol Flynn, Basil Rathbone, Boris Karloff, and Charlie Chaplin, and they are elbow to elbow with Rutland. So they hang out at the club, they eat, drink, share stories, have a good time, and they are dressed to the nines. They're in tuxedos, or they're in like military uniforms, so like army, navy, the kilt, if you're Scottish, if you could wear a kilt, you did wear a kilt, because kilts are cool. They are, fight me. So a lot of the guys are actually originally from a lower social class in Britain, but they're having a fab time in Hollywood, and Rutland fits right in. So they have these massive parties, and he's inviting people to his house, and he'd be out drinking with like Charlie Chaplin and a bunch of US admirals. And he's good, he's charming, he can tell a yarn, like, and people know him because he's Rutland from Jutland. So he's easy to dine out on that a wee bit. Because the admirals, even like the younger ones, like they would know stories of him, like from when they were going through academy and whatnot. Rutland from Jutland, a World War I aviation hero. And like they would tell the stories to like the US admirals, and you know, it would just be like a whole thing. So he was really lucky because he was so clever and he was in such a good position to do it, is he would get a lot of his information by just drinking with the right people. So he'd get drunk with these guys, he'd share stories, he'd talk about flying in the war, and my plane would do this and my plane would do that. What would your plane do? Don't know why I made him a Cockney. But yeah, you would like tell stories like this would do this would do that. What is yours like? And so obviously these guys want to impress this like hero. Like they want to do that. And so they would tell him. And so he would just gather information. So he's collecting info, and he would go on holiday once a year at least, stopping off in Hawaii and taking his kids. You know, it's such a normal thing to do. Not suspicious at all. So not only does he have his like stocks and shares stuff going on, his like trading business, but he diversifies because of course he does. And you know, he's Rutland from Jutland. And he sets up an aircraft sales company and rents office space just across the runway from the Douglas Aircraft Company plant. So not only can he just look and see what's going on, but also he can shoot the shit with the Douglas employees down at the Del Monte Club. So Japan is super interested in what's happening at the Lockheed plant in Burbank because they're working on the P-38, which is a twin-piston engined fighter. Naturally, because Japan wants this information, Rutland's going to go get it, and he finds an employee to grease up. So, gets drunk with him, buddy, and this guy tells him that Lockheed needs a janitor, and he's like, I know a guy. And the guy in question is Raymond Alexander Barry, an ex-IRA man. So like, he's like this grumpy, you know, former member of the Irish Republican Army. Like he would have fought in the Irish War of Independence. Like that's what he would have done. And so he goes over to the States and he's like friends with like Boris Karloff. And so he's got this resume, his CV, and they're like, he knows like all of these stars, he hobnobs with them. Why does he want to be a janitor? And he's like, I just need the job. Now his reasons for doing it, whom's to say. But Barry becomes a janitor and he steals info on the P-38 Lightning. And pretty sharpish, he's under suspicion because they're like, hey, this info got leaked not long after this guy started working here. But like, I think we have to like take a moment because Rutland is not an idiot. He's not an idiot. Like he knows that, you know, the War of Independence happened. The Irish War of Independence happened. And he would have known, you know, what the IRA was. And still he's like, I'm going to get a member of the IRA to break in to an aircraft plant and steal files. Like, okay, let's do it. I mean, sure, it's all for a laugh, isn't it? But yeah, things start to unravel round about here. Because they're like, hey, how does this happen? And also, a Japanese spy is so excited about his new position, right? Because he's been, he's moving up the ranks. He's been promoted. And he gets drunk and crashes his car and dies. Which is sad, but also inconvenient, because along with him in the car is a briefcase which has a list of names, one of which being Frederick Joseph Rutland. So MI5, their ears are like up a wee bit. They're like, oh, what's going on here? Like, so there's a whisper, there's a concept, they have an idea. Meanwhile, Rutland is actually travelling to Japan. I think he's in Japan in September when World War II breaks out. And he's got his daughter Barbara with him. Like, he's trying to do a whole reconnecting thing. And also spy. He's trying to have it all. Like, isn't that what feminism is about? Sorry. So when he's in Japan, again, he's not a stupid man. He notices that society has gotten very militant. There's a very high military presence, and even the way society is, like, he's like, oh, there's soldiers everywhere. There's a lot going on. Things are very strict. Like, he senses what's happening. He knows trouble is brewing. Like, and he is preparing for that. But more on that in a moment. Because before we get into that, we get to talk about this. So before the MI5 or ISO or OSS or whatever have a whiff of what Rutland is doing, it's Hollywood that clocks him. So basically he would go out to dinner with everybody and he was always picking up the tab. But these fellas he was hanging out with felt that it was a wee bit suspicious that he was a shareholder who literally never tried to sell them any shares. Because, that's what they do. That's generally what you do. Like, you try and sell things to the rich people. The second thing is that there's a war on, and all of these stars are out doing like British Rescue, British War Relief, war bonds. Like, they're all raising money, and they find it super, super shady that he isn't raising money for the war effort. And his actor friends turn him in to the FBI. Under the orders of one J. Edgar Hoover, Rutland's phone is tapped. And so they are listening to him and they are convinced they have enough evidence to get him, and they are ready to swoop in. Until the Office of Naval Intelligence steps in. The Southern California ONI chief, Captain Ellis Zacharias, sends a teletype claiming that Rutland is a double agent. Basically what happened was when he saw what was happening in Japan, his hackles are up, right? Because remember, he's been watching this unfold and he has been an active participant in it. And so he says, fuck this for a game of soldiers. And he contacts the US Navy, warning them about a Japanese attack. He says, historically, Japan has always attacked first and attacked strategically. Like, initially he's trying to get like a proper job in the US Navy. He's like, let me help you. I know my stuff. But at this point, he's old. Like, he's an older gentleman. They're like, yeah, you're a little bit mature for this. You've aged out a wee bit. And on top of this, they're like, yeah, we can't really trust you because we're super suspicious because you worked with the Japanese. But the Navy don't give him like an official job. Not really. And the US ends up telling the UK that they have enough evidence to shoot him for treason. Even though he's not a US citizen, so I think it's something other than treason, really. Now, the UK thinks this is rhetorical, or at least they hope it is. But they really want to keep the US on side because they want them to join the war and fight the Nazis. But also, they're not keen on negative press. Again, they're all about morale and the war effort. So they try to lure him back to Britain by offering him a job. And it works. So they fly him over. And here's the thing. It is a very difficult and complicated thing to do because you've got German U-boats, you've got an active war happening, and they are flying him back like a VIP. He's getting first class treatment all the way there. And when he lands in Ireland, because the plane has to refuel after crossing the Atlantic, they confiscate his passport and they're like, oh, it's just what we do. Don't worry about it. Because initially they're like, you're a free citizen. Don't worry. Everything's chill. This is totally legitimate and is no form of subterfuge whatsoever. It's just totally normal to not be allowed to travel anywhere because travel is restricted because war. And he's like, that seems fair enough. Yeah. So when he ends up in England, he's interrogated by MI5 and he just offers to work as a double agent for them. He's like, listen, I've got the connections, I've got the skills. I'm supposed to be set up in this place in Mexico. I can sort you out. And they're just not having it. They're not keen on this situation. And as they're trying to accuse him of a crime, they realize they can't because he hasn't done anything to Britain. He hasn't committed any acts of treason against the government or His Majesty. He hasn't sold any UK secrets, military or otherwise. And when he worked for Japan, or the Japanese Navy, Japan and the UK were allies. So he wasn't working with the enemy. So technically, he hadn't done anything. And he was just kind of free-ish. But then, on the 7th of December 1941, just as he had predicted, he had given them a timeline as well. He was like, hey, I think an attack is going to happen, during this. And so, yes, on the 7th of December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service hit Pearl Harbor with a surprise military strike. And this changes everything. The USA just gears up and it is ready to go to war, but now it's fighting on two fronts. Well, more, actually, there's loads of fronts, but two main ones, But they are more focused on the Japanese side of it. They're the Pacific is where they're at. Because their priority is revenge. So Rutland is then detained under the Defence Regulation 18B, which basically locks people up without trial as enemies of the state. And so he is thrown in jail in Brixton Prison, and he stayed there for 2 years. And while he's there, fascists and suspected Nazi spies, they were in and out. And all of this is basically kept stum. He's there for 2 years, and the info just doesn't get out. If there wasn't a war going on, this kind of information would have been just everywhere. But there's a war, there's a whole press issue there. And yeah, they're trying to keep it quiet because they don't want the embarrassment of it. And they're trying to keep this as low as possible. But then it hits the House of Commons, and a bunch of Rutland's old pals in the Navy, they think he's getting, the short end of the stick. His daughter ends up returning from the US, while he's in Brixton Prison, to try and get him to clear his name. And he has to explain to her that, I can't clear my name because I haven't actually been accused of anything. He's not been accused of anything. They haven't got anything on him. So, it's easy to maintain your innocence when you haven't been charged with a crime. He's there, and these known fascists and actual Nazi spies are free before he is. It's wild. He's also not a young man at this point, and yet he's in this prison longer than a lot of these arseholes. All right. I'm not condoning what he did. This is not good by any stretch of the imagination. But also, he did try and turn the tide, and nobody listened to him. So, by the end of the war, he's released with no charge ever brought against him. And understandably, he never returns to the US. Probably because he's not allowed, one. And two, probably felt a wee bit embarrassed. And the money's all tied up there that was there. And that's, hopefully, I think, in the possession of Dorothy and the kids, who stay in LA. Like, they don't come back to Britain, whether it's from shame or whether they just preferred to be out there. Because, like, for his kids, that's all they've ever known, like his second lot of kids. Unsurprisingly, Rutland spends the next few years just bitter and angry. Like, he's disgraced, he's feeling shitty, because of course he is. And eventually it all gets too much for him. And on the 28th of January 1949, Frederick Joseph Rutland dies by suicide in Wales by inhaling gas. In a note addressed to Freddie, his eldest son, it reads, "My life has been an adventurous one, always full of excitement. I have always told myself that so long as life was worth living, I would live it to the full. And when no longer held interest, it would be time to go." And so ends the story of Frederick Joseph Rutland. Rutland of Jutland, Agent Shinkawa, and Beverly Hills Spy. Now, if you liked my retelling of this episode, feel free to rate and review 5 stars. Vote for me in the Irish Podcast Awards, or if you're in Donegal or you're Donegal adjacent, come see my live show. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, that was a very, very sharp tone change from the end. And yeah, you can follow me on all the socials, Threads, Instagram, Meta, stuff, TikTok, all the stuff. And yeah, I guess it's recommendation time. So for reading, obviously I'm going to recommend Beverly Hills Spy by Ronald Drabkin. It's a good, decent read. Go read it. Get it from your library. It still counts. And so for listening, I am going to recommend my new comfort podcast, which is Red Handed, which I had avoided listening to for so long because I wasn't really sure I was going to be into it. And then I started listening to those two women talk, and honestly, so soothing. And for watching, I am going to tell you to watch something ridiculous, which is Space Cadet. Watch the silly movie. Let yourself have some joy in your life. And with that, I'm going to say good night. Adios, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, my friends. Bye-bye.